There you go. Thanks, Maya. Woo! I'm glad the video's not on.
Okay, good morning, Timothy, once again. This time on air. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. Yes. And well, it is Sunday, October the 8th. This is the 139th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One, and we have Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Esquire, with us. Without any further ado, I am giving you the mic or the floor, Timothy. So let's start with the briefing and see what's happening in Japanese politics right now.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everyone. Maya has been reaching out to a couple of our long-term fans, our long-term participants in this briefing, to ask for your advice on how things are going with the briefing and what you like and what you don't like. And what we keep hearing from a couple of these, the people who have responded is, Langley, please try and stick to the 30-minute briefing, and you always go over, and I do. I apologize about that. There's always so much to talk about. Please hit the high points, and then let's focus on the Q&A. So one of the beauties of this briefing is that it's one-on-one. That's the title of this briefing, so that you can actually participate and draw out some of the issues that maybe I touched upon or I didn't touch upon well enough. And in the exposition of trading ideas and talking about these issues, apparently more heat and light is generated as a consequence of that. So I'll try and follow that advice in this briefing. Try and keep my comments as brief and as tightly compacted as possible, and then roll into the Q&A so that this one doesn't go too far off of the rails, as sometimes we do. But there's a lot going on in Japanese politics, and for those of you who follow it or that it is a component of your job, there's no place else in the world to get what's going on in Japanese politics in English but right here. So I really appreciate Maya initiating this initiative, and for all of the people who have been joining us for 139 consecutive weeks. Thank you very much for that. So you might have seen in the news that Sapporo has decided the 2030 Winter Olympics, I don't know if we're going to actually do that. So the mayor of Sapporo is going to come down to Tokyo this next week to explain his decision to withdraw from his bid to be the host for Sapporo to be the host of the Winter Olympics in 2030. So Sapporo has hosted the Winter Olympics in the past. I think it was in 2012 or something like that. But apparently the residents of the city are not so hot on it. And the reason why they're not so hot on it is because they're looking at what happened with Tokyo, with the Olympics here in 2020 that was delayed a year, you might recall, to 2021. The huge fiasco with the magnificent Olympic Stadium in the what's the name of the park? Yoyogi Park. Not Yoyogi. It's what is it, Maya? Gaien, the Gaien Park.
Gaien, sorry. Yes.
Right. And also a lot of the scandal that was going on with the Olympic Committee here and the bid rigging, and it was at the highest level, and the chairman of the Olympic Committee, Mr. Mori, who was formerly prime minister and formerly the leader of the Abe faction, as you might recall. So this kind of very bad feeling that is lingering over from what happened in the Tokyo Olympics apparently is affecting the citizenry of Sapporo. And in the International Olympic Committee weighs the sentiment of the population very heavily on hosting or picking the host city for the Olympics. So this has come in as something of a surprise, and probably something suggestive of what might be going on with the Osaka Expo too. So originally for the Sapporo event, well, let's talk about what happened in Tokyo, actually. Originally, it was planned to cost 734 billion yen, which is about $6.6 billion to host the event here in Tokyo. And it ended up costing more than twice that, 1.7 trillion yen. And so the estimates for the 2030 event in Sapporo is now considered to be about 280 to 300 billion yen. But with cost overruns and construction workers, the number of construction workers falling, they're watching very carefully what's going on with the Osaka Expo. And with the Osaka Expo, we're almost a year away from it opening. It's supposed to open in 2025. It was originally billed to cost, when they first came up with this in 2018, it was going to cost 125 billion yen. And now the cost is 185 billion. Well, 2 years later, it was 185 billion. And right now, the estimate is 230 billion. So that is a huge cost overrun. And I think it is scaring away a lot of the potential participants. As you know, and as we've reported here, only 3 countries have submitted their bids to construct a pavilion. And there's pavilion space for 21 countries to build a pavilion there that will be left on the site after the expo finishes. And as a consequence of not just material cost overruns, it's more expensive, the yen-dollar value, so they're paying more for imported materials, but also the number of construction workers is precipitously fallen, and you can't get enough workers indigenously here. You have to import them, and that's also a problem. So what it looks like now is maybe the 2030 Olympics will be grabbed by Sweden or France. France is supposed to be, it's not so much in the news, actually. I guess it's just the timing, but France is supposed to be the host of the Summer Olympics in 2024, next year. And it looks like Salt Lake is going to bid for the 2030 Winter Olympics, as does Sweden. And in 2028, the Summer Olympics are planned for Los Angeles. And they've also supported the Olympics in the past, as you know, in 2002. But compared to the public support in Sapporo, the public support is very high in Los Angeles and also in Salt Lake City. Almost 80% of the people vote for that. So the International Olympic Committee will announce at the beginning of the Summer Olympics in 2024 in Paris who the next or who the Winter Olympics will be in 2030. So it's not going to be Sapporo, apparently, and it's not a kind of a death knell for what's going on otherwise. But I think the reality is just hitting people that these kinds of big ticket items, although Japan could use it as a boost, it doesn't produce the revenue, and with the just the terrible corruption that was evidenced by the Tokyo Olympics, people just don't want to have a hand in that. So they're beginning to back off a little bit. The question is, what will happen with Osaka? Will the Osaka Expo go forward? And I think it's a little bit too late to pull the plug, but you just never know. If the plug is pulled on the Osaka Expo, it's going to leave the governor and the entire administration, which is basically dominated by Ishin, with a huge black eye and something they have to explain to the population. So there's a lot going on there for Ishin. Ishin runs the governor's office. They run the mayor's office. They hold more than 50% of the seats in the assembly. The LDP doesn't have it doesn't have any lower house members in Osaka. They were all defeated by Ishin. This fight that's going on there between Ishin and their ability to climb up and their desire to beat the number one opposition party, which is a Constitutional Democratic Party, continues unabated. And there are a lot of components of that, not just the yen-dollar rate, but also the ability of foreign workers to come in. Much of this is being controlled and managed by the central government, which is dominated by the LDP. So a lot of politics is going on here. We see the end result, but understanding how it gets there is pretty important. One of the focuses of our briefing, as you know. Governor Danny Tamaki is the governor of Okinawa, as you might know. I grew up on Okinawa, so things that are going on in Okinawa are always very interesting to me. He's the governor, and he is fighting against the Tokyo central government about this long-term plan to move the Marine Air Corps from Futima into Henoko. Henoko is a spit of land that they're dumping land on to build it up. It's right on the water to move the Marine Air Corps from Futima, which is it's densely populated now. It wasn't when it was first started. It's a huge training base with helicopters and aircraft flying in. And the population has just grown massively around it. And it's a dangerous place for such a densely populated area. So early in this the 2020s, it was, I'm sorry, when was the plan? It was in, I think, 2010. It was earlier than that. The United States and Japan agreed to move this base. You might remember quite a while back that they were thinking of moving the densely populated military presence in Okinawa partially to Guam. And they decided that Guam is just too far away. Okinawa is the best place in the Pacific to have these military forces. And then they came up with an idea to move them from Futima to a couple of sites. And they identified Henoko in 2010, I believe. And this created a bit of a controversy. The governor that accepted that was changed out to another governor who was against it. And eventually, in 2018, Denny Tamaki became governor, and he's been fighting against it ever since then. So there's a fight now going on between the governor of Okinawa, who says the Okinawan people do not want this piece of land built up. The Supreme Court has been asked for their opinion in Japan. The government is saying we need to move this, and although the reclamation of this property, you don't like it, there's a lot of design flaws that you've been criticizing, but we need to move forward. We need to move people out of Futenma into this site, and if the construction is being delayed any further, it's going to cause trouble for us and for the United States military, and as a kind of protector of the waters around Japan, this is critical to us. Denny Tamaki has stoutly refused this. He is now being sued, or the Okinawa is being sued by the Ministry of Land to get this reclamation back on track. And so it appears now that in a court battle that the Ministry of Land will take over the decision of what is going to be going on in Okinawa rather than the governor. So this is a huge fight between Okinawa. It's a long standing battle, and it pushes Governor Tamaki into the limelight once again. By the way, Governor Tamaki is a product of the U.S. forces going into Okinawa big time, as they do in Korea, Vietnam, many places. And a lot of kids are born from that amount of military forces in the region. Many soldiers, they have girlfriends or wives, and then they come back to the United States. They leave them there. Denny Tamaki is a product of that. We don't even know who his army father was. He wasn't quite an orphan because his mother was still there, but he is a product of that. And he's also just homegrown Okinawan because he represents that kind of district of the population that is against the U.S. military forces being so dominant there. So, as you know, I think most people on this program already realize, the vast majority of U.S. forces stationed in Japan are in Okinawa. So it's a huge feature there. And with Denny Tamaki trying to stop the forces from taking over more land and maybe disrupting the ecology of the island, it looks like this fight is going to go forward, and the the vectors look like he is actually going to have to give that up in a lawsuit that will be launched very, very quickly. In separate news, he greeted the ambassador from China just this last week. Interestingly enough, Ambassador Wu Jianghu visited Okinawa on Thursday and Friday, and they had a couple of meetings, a lot of meetings in the press. And Denny Tamaki expressed his desire to have tighter and better relationships with China, which received a good audience there. You know, they have sister city ties with Fujian, and he visited Fujian maybe 5 months ago, almost to a hero's welcome. He was lavished with gifts and got a lot of press there. He spent a couple of weeks in China visiting, and it's a interesting confluence of events there. As you might recall, Okinawa was a vassal state of China in the 1600s and the 1700s until it was overtaken by the Southern clan in Japan. It was invaded and subjugated. But before that, it was an independent nation that straddled China and Japan proper, and it was a huge trading port. They had their own language, their own culture. It was a fantastic nation unto itself, and it was absorbed by the Japanese in the early 1700s. So there is a history there, and there's this controversy between China and Japan and all of these things. The Chinese are big time in Okinawa, buying a lot of property and land there, running businesses. So it's an interesting dynamic that's going on there, and the confluence of these two events is pretty interesting. So it will be coming up later in other briefings, but keep your eye on Okinawa. There's always something going on there. This last week ended a conference between Japan and 8 Asian nations to work on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is an issue that you're going to hear increasingly more about because of the activities going on in China and in North Korea. So there's a lot of hackings, there's a lot of ransomware that's going on there. It is reported that North Korea gets a huge amount of their revenue from ransomware and from hacking, and Japan is a favorite target, not only because it's the third wealthiest country in the world, but also because the infrastructure here and the technical prowess of Japanese cybersecurity experts is so low comparatively. So China has warehouses full of people. Their level of competence is far exceeding what Japan has and what Japan can throw at it, perhaps even approaching that of what the United States possesses. So being so close and available, there's an awful lot going on there. So the United States had this conference with the 8 Asian nations. They signed a memorandum of understanding to collaborate more and to provide better security. The National Center for Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity, NISC, is an organization in Washington, D.C. that's driving this initiative, and you're going to hear a lot more coming out of there. So it's not just cyber, it's also space, it's satellite, it's technology. What's going on with Konotaro and the digital agency is also something that's going to be more increasingly in the news. Now that he has actually survived himself in this recent cabinet reshuffle, he is still the minister of the digital agency. And I think that's an important feature too. So there's a lot going on there. Also, Seoul and Tokyo held their first strategic talks in 9 years. The vice ministers of the foreign ministry for both countries joined forces. They met in Seoul this last week. First time in 9 years. This is pretty significant. And I think, as we reported this last week, that they're building up for a 3-way summit between Japan, Korea, and China to meet with the leaders there. They're building up for that. There looks to be some appetite. It could happen before the year is out, but it's significant that in 9 years they haven't met. So the Biden administration and their encouragement and push to get South Korea and Japan more closely cooperating, it is producing good results, and you've got to take your hat off to the Biden administration for achieving that, because there was a huge gap there They are sharing information and critical technologies on trajectory and launch sites, that sort of thing. This also needs to be viewed with the glasses of the Tomahawk missiles that the United States is preparing for sale to Japan. So originally, when Japan decided to go from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP to be devoted to the defense structure, the Tomahawk missiles were always considered to be a component of that. 400 Tomahawk missiles, it's a system, it's not just the individual missiles, but it's a system that would be based in the south of Japan and also in the north of Japan. The south to prevent or help deter what's going on potentially between China and Taiwan, and in the north to defer or deter what's potentially going on in North Korea. And these Tomahawks, what they've done is they've advanced the deployment of them by a full year. So by this time next year, about 200 Tomahawks of the system that Japan has agreed to purchase will be deployed. And this is interesting because the Tomahawks, they're the most advanced system that the United States has, address the launch sites and the critical infrastructure and the command and control nodes of the adversaries. And what the strategy here is, should there be a launch or a potential launch, Japan, armed with these Tomahawks, could proactively, preeminently attack these sites. And that doesn't sound too much like a defense capability. It sounds more like an offensive capability, which is a problem for the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution. It is moving forward. These arguments are being held within the confines of the Diet. People are debating that. But I think once again, at some point in time, and probably sooner rather than later within the next 5 years, a referendum will be offered for the revision of the Constitution so that Japan can have more offensive capabilities. But these Tomahawks, it's very expensive, and I think the moving it forward by 1 year is pretty significant. It tells you, take a look at Japan and South Korea having this strategic alliance, this strategic discussion with the foreign ministry, and this talk with China being pursued, that a lot of things are beginning to come together, hopefully not in a bad way, in a constructive way, but you just never know. There's an awful lot going on militarily throughout the islands and with the United States and like-minded countries with the United States and NISC and the cybersecurity going on there. Japan was just invited to join the Space Force, the newest military force that the United States launched. This is a big deal for Japan, too, to be a part of that. So there's a lot going on in a lot of different areas. We can't avoid what's going on with the Bank of Japan. You will have noticed, I'm sure, that the yen-dollar ratio breached 150 yen to the dollar just this last week on Tuesday. This caused a lot of concern, and for foreigners coming into Japan, it's a boon. I mean, prices are, almost half of what they normally would have been because of the power of foreign currencies as compared to the yen. So it's causing real concern. The Bank of Japan leapt in and corrected it quickly. I think on Friday, the yen closed at about 148.6 to the dollar. So it has come down. But you might remember this time last year, the yen surged past 150 yen to the dollar. The Bank of Japan rushed in. They supported it with a massive investment by purchasing or by issuing bonds. As you know, Japan, the Japanese government holds more than 50% of the bonds that support this debt that allow the economy to move in that regard. So it's not always the foreign money or even individual money that is being invested in the bonds that are produced by the Bank of Japan. So we watch the Bank of Japan pretty carefully because that is the barometer of how the economy is going. And currently, the Bank of Japan governor has said he's going to be watching this. He needs to see wages increasing at a pace that keeps up or exceeds the inflation rate. That's not working for him. It's not working for the prime minister. The prime minister is increasingly worried about that. So you can't have a snap election, and you can't run a government with a high degree of confidence if the people are getting less and less purchase power for their wages, while the economy and the inflation keeps increasing. And that's what's happened here. Japan has now suffered the 21st consecutive increase in inflation, and for 6 consecutive quarters, the wages have been dropping each month. So as inflation continues to rise, the nominal power of Japanese wages continues to decline. So people aren't spending money, they're not taking vacations, they're not going out to eat. And as you know, the economy is, most economies of countries are driven by internal consumption and the engine of growth internally. Japan's is not. It is dependent largely on export and money that's coming in from overseas to purchase finished products. And that's not a healthy situation. So the prime minister is devoted to correcting that situation. He has announced last week, after coming back from New York and speaking at the UN, that he's going to have an extraordinary session starting on the 20th of this month. So very, very closely. Today is what, the 8th? Today's the 8th, Maya. In 12 days, the Diet will hold its extraordinary session. It will probably run about 6 weeks. And it's interesting, if you put yourself in the position of the prime minister, the Diet will start on the 20th. That's a Friday. It's the last day of the week. And the election for the 2 seats that are open right now, there's a by-election, one for the upper house and one for the lower house, is 2 days away. It's on the 22nd. So the prime minister will be geared up to, number one, promoting the 2 candidates, one for the lower house, one for the upper house, who are LDP candidates. So both of these seats are occupied now by LDP candidates, or they're vacant now. The upper house member died while in office. The lower house member was involved in a scandal where physical violence was visited upon one of his Diet staff. And so that was a scandal. He resigned in disgrace as a consequence of that, thus opening that seat. And in Japanese parliamentary rules, you have to fill that seat within a certain period of time. And if there's no election that's near that, then you have to have a by-election. That's what we're going through right now. People are saying that this will be a referendum for the prime minister. If the LDP wins both of these seats, then that means everybody loves him. And all of the things that he has been talking about childbirth and wages and dampening down inflation, all of these things that he's going to be saying from now until that day. So we've only got, 12 days where we're going to hear all of these pronouncements of the prime minister. So keep your ear open. There's a lot that he's going to be talking about. And as we know from this prime minister, he lacks a little bit of flair, but he speaks really a big picture. Ever since he's been prime minister, it's been 2 years now, he talks a big talk, but when it comes time to implementing that, he's a little bit short on it. This new capitalism, for example, or bringing more foreigners into the country. He came back from New York with this idea that he would have English-only enclaves where finance people could come in and they could establish their base and bring their kids and really begin to invigorate Japan as a hub. Since everybody's leaving Hong Kong, they're going to Singapore. Singapore is basically packed to the gills with the foreigners, and it's caused real problems politically in the city-state, because the people who have lived and grown up there, who are citizens there, are being squeezed out, or the foreigners are just dominating the entire economy there. So they need another place to go. Japan is saying, why don't you come to Japan? And most people are saying, no, I don't want to have to learn Japanese in order to ply my trade. So there's a lot going on that particular front as well. But it's something that we should be carefully watching, because it is in great play. Where else? The um, yes, let me see. The household spending has fallen for the sixth straight month, and the Prime Minister and the Bank of Japan are very. They've got a loose money policy so that people can borrow and spend money relatively easy. We're talking about corporations now with this trickle down theory that it will hit the economy as well. But the Bank of Japan governor is being hesitant. He's being encouraged by the Prime Minister and the administration to be a little bit more aggressive. But with the yen hitting 150 to the dollar just this last week, there's some red flags that are there. So it's less of an option for them. So as options become limited, the Prime Minister, who wants to have a snap election, who doesn't want to have to be beholden too much to his other faction leaders, wants to be Prime Minister again for the election that happens in 1 year from now. A snap election actually is being considered before the end of the year. It sounds very aggressive and unreasonable to me, but if the election for the two house, the upper house and the lower house seat, go in the LDP's favor, and they should, they've been held by the LDP. They're LDP strongholds. Ishin wants to come in, and the Constitutional Democratic Party want to challenge the LDP supremacy there. So a lot could happen there. At the same time, Ishin has its problems. The Constitutional Democratic Party has its parties. And just as a bit of a digression there, the Constitutional Democratic Party, led by lower house member Tamaki, he took over from Edano, who basically started the earlier Constitutional Democratic Party. They took over power, then they changed, and it became the Constitutional Democratic Party. They lost in 2021, and he took responsibility for that. He resigned as the leader, and Mr. Tamaki became the leader. Now, Mr. Edano, who is very popular within the party, he's still in the party, he's still a leading figure there, has decided he wants to take another bite at the leadership. So at a time when they want to challenge the LDP for these two diet seats, this controversy currently going on there is probably taking a little bit of the energy out, since the leadership is somewhat divided. So there's a lot going on there. I think you're going to see Ishin coming in very strong. Ishin is a little bit more organized. They have less internal dynamic controversies going on there. The LDP has dynamic controversies going on all the time, with the Abe faction still kind of unsure footing, can we say. They do have their leadership, but if there's a snap election, they better get their act together, because they could dominate LDP politics in a way that no other faction could. So a lot to be said there. If there's going to be a snap election before the end of this year, there's a lot to be happening before that. I don't know if Halloween is going to have anything to do with that, but the mayor of Shibuya has said that Halloween will be at the end of this month, over the weekend. And if you've been a resident of Tokyo during Halloween, you know how crazy it gets, especially in Shibuya. So he's a little bit concerned about the revelry and the people drinking. So he has outlawed public drinking. It's been outlawed before. They're going to increase by 50% the number of police in Shibuya, in Akasaka, Roppongi, in these hotbed areas. But yeah, it gets pretty crazy. So the mayor is trying to dampen that down and kind of cool the enthusiasm a little bit. I don't know how successful that will be, because Halloween is a big deal here. It's not an indigenous holiday, as you know, but it is one that the Japanese have really taken a liking to. So something to look forward to there. Let me see what we've got here with the Prime Minister. On Thursday, the Prime Minister, interestingly enough, joined a convention of the labor union, Lengo, and this is concerning to the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is usually favored by the labor unions. So the Prime Minister is reaching in. The LDP typically stands for big business. He's reaching in to offer a hand to the labor unions. This is pretty interesting, and it is also an indication that he's thinking of a snap election before the end of the year to coalesce the forces and to bring people who are not normally inclined to think highly of the prime minister, and they think or they vote more with the opposition party, that in fact there could be some mending of fences there. To enhance this, he also, when he did the cabinet reshuffle, he identified and selected a member who was a member of the Democratic People's Party, which is a minor opposition party. They have maybe 35 members in the parliament, but they had their discussion a couple of weeks ago. Should we coalesce our forces with the opposition parties to form a group to go against the LDP, or should we snuggle up to the LDP and become more friendly with them? That discussion, that decision was made maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, and the decision of the Democratic People's Party, DPP, was let's snuggle up to the LDP and try and join in those areas where we don't have huge disagreements, and maybe we could be invited into the government as an alliance partner like Komeito. The signals of that are beginning to emerge. So at this this meeting with the labor union, he also had in his recent shuffling of the cabinet, an upper house member, Wakako Yata, identified to help the government mend these fences. So this is pretty interesting that he's got a DPP member that he's kind of ponied up with to help the unions increase their wages and get more workers into the work stream, and also to raise the minimum wage. So as you know, the prime minister was successful in raising the minimum wage to 1,000 yen per hour, the largest increase in 30 years for laborers. He was able to push through this last year. So there's a lot going on with the labor movement and the LDP. The prime minister wants to succeed himself. He wants to have a snap election if he can manage it. So a lot will be told within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then we've got the extraordinary diet session. They haven't put a date on the end of it, but typically it will end the first week or the second week of December. So that just gives them about 5 to 6 weeks to run this extraordinary diet session, the purpose of which is to establish a supplemental budget. So the budget that we are living through now was passed 2 years ago, and then the bank vaults opened up on April of this year. They're running through that money, and they see that it's not enough. 2 years ago, when they made the plan, when they accepted the budgets from all of the various ministries to run the government and the economy, they missed it by a little bit. So they need to tweak it with a supplementary budget. And that is the purpose of having this extraordinary diet session. And I've got to tell you, my prediction is that it will be a huge supplementary budget. It will be one to wow them. The prime minister needs to wow the citizenry that he is really dedicated. He's really concerned. The budget, the supplementary budget that was passed last year, was of that caliber. It was enormous. It was the largest supplementary budget that the government had ever passed. And I think he needs to exceed that, even though we don't have COVID, in order to prepare the economy, prepare the population to like him more. I think what you're going to see in this supplementary budget is going to be really outstanding. It starts in 2 weeks, and then they'll have the election, and he's going to be throwing around a lot of nice words, a lot of nice theories about how the government should be run, how we're going to have more children. People are going to buy more cars. We're going to get the economy back on track. And so it'll be a lot of promises, a lot of flowery talk, and then we'll close out the year. So a lot is going to happen between now and the end of the year, so stay tuned to that. The House of Councilors election campaign kicked off on Tuesday of last week, and the House of Representatives election kicks off in 2 days. So for the House of Councilors have 6-year terms. House of Representatives have 4-year terms, and it can be turned over if there's a vote of no confidence or if the prime minister decides he wants to close down the House. So the campaign times for the House of Councilors is a little bit longer than that for the House of Representatives. So that's why the start date is staggered for the House of Councilors and the House of Representatives, but it's staggered so that they coalesce on election day on the 22nd of this month. And that's the reason for that. And as I said, I think the LDP is in the pole position. If they lose either one of those, it's really not a good look for the prime minister. So you can imagine that they're going to pull out all stops. This is a kind of a battle testing for Miss Obuchi, who was just appointed in the cabinet reshuffle to be the election campaign strategy chief within the LDP. This is a big deal for her. She has been kind of out of the limelight for the last 14 years. She was Minister of Industry. She resigned as a consequence of a scandal. 2 of her diet aides were arrested as a consequence of that. She stepped out, didn't take any blame for it, but I think Bunshun and the population in general still continue to criticize her, which is really too bad. I mean, as one of the 5 women who have joined the administration in this recent cabinet reshuffle, this is the largest number of women since the time that she was appointed Minister of Economy and Industry, 14 years ago. So it's tough for her. And if this election doesn't go well, then the knives will be out for her as well. So it's testing ground for her. It's testing ground for the prime minister's reshuffled cabinet. A lot of people are looking at that. If there's criticism that's coming up, or if there's a scandal that's going on, 3 of the current ministers, not just ones that are brand new, but also ones that have repeated themselves in their cabinet portfolio, are under deep scrutiny now. So when the prime minister did this the first time 2 years ago, he lost 4 ministers in a very brief period of time. No prime minister has survived that. He has. So people who are against him, the opposition parties, people who don't want to see him succeed, even within the LDP, are rubbing their hands, hoping for something to happen so that maybe there's a stumble and we have a new prime minister in the new year. There are a couple of, candidates for that would love to vie for it. They're, of course, keeping their powder dry and not saying much about it, but people in this audience know who we're talking about. The other interesting thing that came up with regard to Japanese politics is the Unification Church hearing. So the Cultural Ministry is the agency that has the purview over religious organizations. And the Unification Church, started in 1954 in Seoul, Korea, has a big following in Japan and was very much enticed or is enticing Japanese politicians to say nice things about them, to endorse them, to elaborate about the benefits to society that they bring, and that's true. But they did have another ulterior motive, following on the steps of what Soka Gakkai did on creating their political arm to be Komeito, which was a very successful, very clever ploy. They were attempting to follow the same pattern there and cozying up very closely to Japanese politicians, particularly those that are in the Abe faction. So now it looks like, with the assassination of former Prime Minister Abe, that the Culture Ministry is taking the Unification Church to court. It's in the Tokyo District Court. They want to withdraw their status as a religious organization and collapse them. This has happened only twice, I think. The second time was with the Om Shinrikyo, which was responsible for the gas attack in Tokyo about 20 years ago. So it looks like there will be some movement with the Unification Church. People can't wait for that to be finished because there are so many politicians currently in office who are implicated in the Unification Church. But it does look like the die is somewhat already cast. It will be a slow process, but it is something that really weighs on the political process very heavily. So we're going to continue to watch that. I think there will be a dissolution order perhaps before the end of this year. And let me see, what else do I have? I think that's it. We already talked about Yukio Edano, his move to reassert leadership, and that's a pretty big move with a lot going on in Japanese politics. You can't ignore what's going on with the opposition camps as well. Maya, I'd like to wrap it up, and following the suggestions and the recommendations from some of our listeners to keep it tight there and to focus more on the Q&A. Let's get into that portion now. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Timothy, for the briefing. And while we are waiting for questions in in Clubhouse and also LinkedIn, I wanted to ask you a couple of my questions. I know that you're scared, and I'm sorry. Just stay there, don't run away. You just mentioned that the Unification Church might be dissolved. So what will be the implications possible, or what are the possible implications from that dissolution, both for the Unification Church as an organization and for the LDP as well? If you can help
Sure.
us there.
So
Yes.
there are a couple of facets there. Number one is, I guess they would dissolve. They lose their tax-free status as a religious organization. So it doesn't mean that they would dissolve, but without the tax-free status, it's difficult to imagine that the contributions and also just the bad reputation that's being generated would allow them to continue like they are now. So they were on a roll. They've been in Japan very actively proselytizing, collecting members, and collecting fees and what would you call them? Donations from their members. So they have a bit of a war chest. They could survive a little bit longer, but not as a religious organization. Their idea was to be a religious organization with a political arm to it, and it wasn't quite successful there. So that's the first implication. The second implication is there's a little bit of retribution, perhaps, that's due here. We supported you politicians. We helped you get elected. There are more than 40 members of parliament right now that without the help of the Unification Church would not be members of parliament. Okay? So the Unification Church, if it gets punished by the cultural agency, they could say, we supported you for the last 15 or 20 years, and you were supported by us in order to protect us, and you didn't do that. And the fact that Shinzo Abe was killed because there was some member that his mother gave all of their inheritance to the Unification Church, you still, owe us an obligation, and you didn't. So we're going to speak a little bit more expansively about our relationship with you because you're not going to become a member of parliament anymore. So the LDP could lose their hold on power as a direct consequence of the Unification Church becoming more expansive about what the Unification Church involvement was with the LDP, particularly with the Abe faction. So there's that thing. So that's why the politicians they're eager for this thing to be resolved and swept under the carpet and for it to go away, but it's not the end of the story.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. And once again, just to continue, along these lines. So we have seen, in recent history, of course, that when there is a problem with an organization, be it a business organization, a religious organization, or any other kind of organization, they just opt for changing their name and continuing their activities. So I know that, and there is a very recent example of that actually in the Japanese business as well with Johnny's Jingguang.
Right.
Yes, but before we move towards that one, I wonder, do you expect that the Unification Church would attempt to do something like that?
Oh,
Change
sure.
the name and, continue the activities and so on.
So as you know, as everybody on the show knows, Japan is, it has an ambivalent relationship with religions in general. It has Shintoism, it has Buddhism, and then it has lots of religions that have established here. Famously, the Christians and the Catholic Church, even in the 1500s, was building inroads here. But after the end of the war, a lot of Protestant religions and missionaries came to Japan to develop it, and they received, it was fertile ground for them. And I think the Unification Church strikes a resonant chord among a certain portion of the Japanese. So there isn't real spirituality in the sense of how the Catholics or the Mormons or the Hindus or even the Muslims perceive it. It's a different kind of environment here, but there is a certain segment that yearns for that kind of deeper meaning, and these kinds of religions are very attractive to them. The one that was started in Seoul by Sung Young Moon was the Unification Church, wildly popular throughout the world, in fact. So I think, although Japan has its problems, the Unification Church is strong in other countries too. They could continue on in a different guise, in a different method. I think people will be watching out for that, but it's not illegal. And I think there are enough people who are embedded into that kind of psychology and into that kind of religious fervor. I think it wouldn't go away. So yes, it is possible that it would continue in another guise. And that sort of thing happens here in Japan all the time. Your reference to Johnny's Gym Show is really a good one, because yes, just change the leadership, change the name, have the guys who are resigning take the blame, and then just start off with, dusted off new clothes. It happens. It's not all bad. People still want to pursue their livelihood based on the good aspects of what happened. And sometimes you get a bad apple, you get some bad leadership, you get people who are corrupt, and you can start all over again. So it's not like Japan is kind of like that, though. You don't throw everybody out and throw them in jail. You allow them to kind of a little bit more gently reconfigure themselves, and that happens in Japanese society, in polite society as well, but also in business and in politics too. The funny thing about that is, once again, about Miss Obuchi, she made a mistake, she took blame for it, and she kind of kept a low profile, and then she came back again, and people are still hammering her. So, it's kind of, it cuts both ways. But I think for a lot of people who have stumbled and fallen down, they do get resold and put back up on the shelf. So it does happen here with a high degree of frequency.
Yes, it does indeed. Well, we have a question from Mario in Clubhouse, and it is about, related to geopolitics. So I'll read it out to you. What are the positions of the different parties in regards of the Israel conflict and the regional arrangements in and around Gaza? Not just now, but also before yesterday.
Yeah, so I'm not up to speed on that, but I know that the relationship between Israel and Japan is very strong. It's a good relationship. It's deep. The number of Israeli businesses that are importing into Japan or exporting into Japan, and the relationships there. The cultures are very, very different in some regards, but very similar in other regards. And I think Israel can depend on Japan to be a very strong ally. But there's been a lot of action going on there over the last 2 weeks. I'm not up to speed on that. I wasn't prepared for this geopolitical view of it, but I can bone up on it. But because it's just not going to stop, it's going to continue. There's a lot going on there. If you're not familiar with what has been going on, it's in the papers all the time. But let me get back to you on that, Mario. Great question. Sorry, I can't address it. Maybe you can address it. Have you got any goods on us, Mario?
Yes, Mario, if you can join us, and if you have information about this, please do join us on stage in Clubhouse. Just let me know. I'll bring you up to the stage. And yes, if you allow me to go back then to the Japanese politics again. So Timothy, you mentioned that Prime Minister Kishida, he attended one of the conventions of Rengo, and that actually was a kind of not a good thing for the Constitutional Democratic Party for the Democratic Party for the People, because they actually are trying to, through the support of Rengo, to become the second or the first opposition power here. But my question actually is, how about Ishin? Has Ishin ever actually tried to cozy up to Rengo, or is it something that is not part of Ishin's strategy
Okay.
yet?
You misspoke about one thing. So the Democratic Party for the People
Yes.
is trying to cozy up to the LDP. And the fact that this female member, Miss Kato, is identified by the Prime Minister as an individual to be seen with and to be doing business with suggests that the Democratic DPP is cozying up to the LDP. So it's not like the LDP is stealing anything, the DPP's inroads with labor. It is more of an attempt to coalesce. On the other hand, with Ishin and the Constitutional Democratic Party, yes, they actually together have been receiving support from Rengo.
Okay.
And some of the policies with the Constitutional Democratic Party and the policies of Ishin are a little bit different. So there was one idea, we talked about it here, where there should be more cooperation between these two major opposition parties so that we can combine forces and go against the LDP. Ishin and the Constitutional Democratic Party made a decision. Let's talk about Ishin. Ishin decided rather than to go it alone and try and make a coalition, that we're going to try and be a little bit more friendly to the LDP. The Constitutional Democratic Party decided the different way, and they decided to go, let's try and kick the LDP out by not being cozy with them, but identifying those issues where we firmly believe, the issues of child welfare or tax reform or revising the Constitution. We are strong on this, and we're going to go against the LDP on it. So it's actually the difference between the Constitutional Democratic Party and Ishin. It's beginning to fracture, and those areas, particularly with labor, I think they're both attempting to keep that relationship going. And the Rengo is saying, we have to decide between you two, and the LDP is giving us a good option. We're talking with the Prime Minister now about wage increases, and he succeeded there. He gave us a wage increase, the greatest in 30 years. He's increased the minimum wage to 1,000 yen per hour. That's never been done. And he's talking about bringing in more workers, more foreign workers, to attracting and appealing to people to, have better working conditions. In April of this year, the number of overtime hours for truck drivers is being reduced. So they can't work beyond a limited number of overtime hours. They work tremendous overtime hours now. And now with the reduction there, it's to be kinder to them. And that means that since there's scarcity, they do need to be paid a higher wage. And they also need to have more drivers inserted into the economy. So be careful what you wish for. I think with autonomous vehicles, in fact, what's going to happen is the number of drivers is going to be reduced because of the need, but I think their wages will increase, and it will be driven by the LDP. So a lot of things going on with regard to that.
Well, thank you for the clarification. Very much appreciated, and apologies for misspeaking. Well, great. So it looks like we have actually gone through all the questions because you covered the Osaka Expo in the beginning, I believe. We've got, of course, Gerard. He wrote that speaking of the exposition, I would love to hear an update about the expo. And we'll continue keeping our eyes on the expo, of course. And then, Timothy, it looks like we are ready to end the live stream now. Thanks a lot for this to everybody who listened to us this morning on the different platforms we are on. You are interest is very much appreciated. So we'll be here once again at 8:20 next week. And we'll be happy to see you with us again. Timothy, a few words
Every
in
week
conclusion.
is lively here. Next week will be a very lively session. There's going to be a lot going on between now and next week. But in 2 weeks' time, the Prime Minister will have opened the extraordinary session and then the election, and that will be 2 briefings from today. And that one should be chock full of lots of information on what's going on with Japanese politics and the prognosis for having a snap election potentially at that early stage. So please stay tuned. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Okay, once again, put your best smile on.